Digging 16 bullets out of a mafia boss with rusted tools in a basement will completely ruin your life. When exhaustion pushed her to ignore every survival instinct and drag a shredded syndicate king into her tiny apartment, she thought she was just being a nurse. She never expected him to wake up, stare at her with predator eyes, and drag her deep into a violent underworld where she'd have to learn how to shoot back. Boston is drowning under a massive blizzard tonight. Out in the freezing dark, Serafina drags a dying man from the snowdrifts. He has 16 bullets buried in his chest, but his eyes still burn with a desperate fire. Any normal person would keep walking. Instead, she pulls him into the warmth, digs the lead out by hand, and forces his failing heart to beat. The tragic twist is that this bleeding man is Lucian Moretti, the king of the city crime syndicate. By saving a monster, she just placed herself on a violently dangerous chessboard. Sometimes, the hardest lesson we have to accept is that you simply cannot save everyone, no matter how much your soul aches. Settle in. Tonight, you and I are going to unpack this dark tragedy together. She steps out of the free clinic into the biting wind, totally drained from a brutal shift. A cheap wool coat over her scrubs is her only armor against the storm. The harbor district feels entirely abandoned, buried under massive snowdrifts and flickering yellow streetlights. Her tiny apartment is 6 blocks away, but tonight it feels like a freezing marathon. She is pushing through the thick ice when a low, ragged groan cuts through the howling wind. It barely sounds human, more like an animal caught in a snare. Yet, a true healer never really clocks out. Her instincts take over and she freezes. Sometimes, life forces you to pause exactly when all you want to do is run. And that single hesitation reshapes your entire destiny. She turns slowly, squinting into the freezing shadows. The blood looks pitch black against the pristine snow. Common sense screams at her to keep her head down and walk away. This is the harbor district, a rough place where playing the hero usually gets you killed. But she refuses the safe path. Following the heavy trail, she finds a massive man half buried in the ice, wearing a ruined designer suit. His chest is destroyed by catastrophic wounds. Yet, the truly chilling part is that his eyes are wide open and completely alert. He whispers a desperate demand for no police. Anyone else would flee in terror. Instead, Serafina drops to her knees and reaches for his pulse. Life teaches us that real courage is never the absence of fear, but the choice to step into the dark anyway. His pulse fades fast under her icy fingers. She says, he needs a hospital. Suddenly his hand shoots out, gripping her wrist with terrifying strength. No cops, he insists. She really studies him now. The expensive ruined suit, the dark tattoos, the aura of a cornered predator. This man is pure danger. She warns that she cannot move him alone, and he mutters for her to leave him to die. Instead, she makes a choice that rewrites her destiny. Her apartment is close. If he can stand, she will help. But if he drops, she is dragging his corpse to the station. He actually smirks. Hoisting his heavy frame is pure agony, leaving a violent red trail in the blinding snow. It reminds us of a profound truth. The heaviest burdens we ever carry are usually the ones we volunteer to pick up. Serafina drags this massive man through a howling winter storm. Her boots slip on black ice, her chest burning, yet he remains entirely silent. Not a single sound escapes him, even when they crash into a snowdrift. Sometimes you simply must bite your tongue and endure the worst pain to survive. They finally collapse inside her dingy basement apartment, hidden beneath a laundromat. Rusty pipes, a bare floor mattress, and faint radio jazz. She looks at this bleeding mystery slumped against her wall and asks his name. He asks if it even matters. She holds his steady gaze, replying that she wants to know the name of the man she is about to watch die. He hits her with an icy stare, and a rare spark of humanity finally flickers in his cold eyes. He softly drops his name, Lucian. Serafina grabs her shears and slices his ruined shirt away. His chest is a literal war zone of 16 jagged pieces of lead, yet he remains awake, analyzing her like a threat. You never truly know how resilient a person is until they are pushed to the absolute brink. She boils water, grabs her emergency kit, and prepares to dig. She warns him it will be agony. He stares blankly, noting that everything hurts. The first bullet pops out, clinking into a metal bowl. The rest are a nightmare. By the 5th slug, her hands shake violently. Lucian just grunts, ordering her to keep going. She argues she is only a nurse, not a surgeon. He coldly reminds her she is all he has left. The terrifying resignation in his deep voice is enough to give you chills. Pure desperation keeps her hands steady. The grueling hours blur into the metallic clink of lead, hitting a blood-stained bowl. Through 9 extractions, Lucian is a stone wall. But around bullet 10, that thick armor finally cracks. In a feverish whisper, he mentions a 6-year-old girl named Vivian. He pleads that if he dies tonight, someone must tell her he tried. It is profound how that works. Even ruthless monsters harbor one vulnerable spot they would willingly die for. Serafina orders him to stay awake and tell her himself. Bullet 16 is the ultimate nightmare, wedged dangerously against his beating heart. 20 agonizing minutes later, she pulls the lead free and collapses backward. But Lucian goes entirely still on the mattress, and his icy eyes drift shut. His chest stops moving entirely. The silence in that tiny basement room becomes deafening. Serafina refuses to let him fade away after enduring such raw suffering. Panic takes the wheel. She throws her weight over him, slamming her palms against his battered chest. 1, 2, 3, then 10, 11. Tears pour down her face, desperately begging this stubborn giant to breathe. Sometimes the only difference between a bitter tragedy and a miracle is simply refusing to quit when logic says you should. At 30 brutal compressions, she feels a violent shudder. He gasps hard for air. Those icy gray eyes snap wide open, shocked to still exist in the land of the living. She whispers a quiet welcome back, then passes out on the cold floor. By morning, his pulse is rock solid. Now you and I are going to watch this aftermath unfold together. Against every medical odd, this syndicate king is actually holding on. Serafina stands in her cramped kitchen, hands gripping a warm mug, staring at the scarred giant on her floor. You do not catch 16 bullets by living a quiet life. For 3 heavy days, the blizzard rages while he remains unconscious. She pulls exhausting shifts at the clinic, drags herself home, changes his bloody bandages, and collapses. A smarter person would have called the police. Instead, she plays low jazz and reads old cowboy novels out loud. It proves that sometimes the most irrational risks we take reveal exactly who we really are. I swear, whenever the story hits a tense moment, the heavy rhythm of his breathing actually shifts. Night 4 arrives. She is reading a chapter when his icy gray eyes suddenly snap open. His deep voice is remarkably steady as he notes she is still here. Where else would I be? She shoots back. He warns her that smart people run from men like him. She lets out a heavy sigh, guessing she is not that smart. Leaning in to check his fever, she mutters that a simple thank you might be nice. He looks at her like she spoke a forgotten language. You can feel it, this is a man who never thanks anyone. He ignores the remark, intensely scanning her exhausted face and the freezing room. He asks if she lives alone. She admits she grinds 6 days a week at the clinic just to survive. Everyone desperately needs a safe harbor in this cold world, even the most ruthless of predators. She lays her reality out plain. No family, crushing debt, and a mattress on the floor. She stares him down, taking her turn to ask questions. Lucian does not sugarcoat his life. He coldly admits he runs the city underworld. The hitmen wanted his empire, and they will definitely return. She asks if he is a criminal. He says yes with zero hesitation. Any normal person would sprint for the exit, but Serafina merely nods. She figures digging 16 bullets out of his chest already makes her an accessory. She calmly offers him tea. He is genuinely stunned, demanding to know why she would save a literal monster. Her answer is beautifully simple. I am a nurse, and you were dying. Remember this truth. Your real character is exactly what you choose to do when nobody else is watching. Life does not pause for dramatic moments, so she keeps brewing tea. Lucian tracks her from the bed, watching her like a hawk. He is trying to decode a puzzle he has never seen before. He tells her to grab the burner phone from his coat. Miraculously, it works. He coldly orders her to call his contact with a chilling message. Tell them the ghost is alive, she dials, and a gruff voice answers on the first ring. She repeats the code and says, to come alone. The man demands her address and hangs up. She looks at Lucian and asks if she should be worried. He flashes a smile sharp as broken glass. Probably, he whispers. 20 minutes later, 3 heavy knocks shake the door. The takeaway is simple. Once you invite the storm inside your home, you better be prepared for the thunder. Picture the scene. Serafina opens her door to find the hallway light blocked by 2 towering men in heavy coats, radiating underworld violence. Behind them stands a tiny child clutching a worn teddy bear. The largest enforcer spots Lucian bleeding out on the linoleum and freezes in panic. But here is where the narrative shifts. The little girl pushes past the killers, buries her face into Serafina's blood-stained medical scrubs, and whispers a single, devastating word, Mommy. Time stops. Serafina drops to her knees, gathering this trembling Mafia princess into her arms and promising she is safe. The life lesson here is quiet but heavy. We rarely get to pick our family. Sometimes, the dark simply leaves them shivering on your frozen doorstep. Then Lucian finally speaks. Little Vivian whips around at his rough voice, crying out as she sprints across the room. Lucian catches her with his good arm. Briefly, this ruthless underworld king looks at his child with raw, desperate affection. But the warmth dies when his enforcer delivers crushing news. A rival named Damien is burning their syndicate down. Vivian looks at her broken father, carrying way too much trauma for a 6-year-old, and calls him out for hiding his wounds. Through the wreckage of his empire, Lucian forces a gentle smile just for her. Serafina watches, paralyzed by this violent world. The life lesson is a tough one to swallow. Never step into the shadows of someone else's war, unless you are fully prepared to bleed for them. Then the fading boss turns his eyes to her. Lucian stares through his agony and drops a heavy truth. She saved his life, binding them in a blood debt. She tries to refuse, but he silences her. In his underworld, debts equal power, and she just painted a target on her back. If his rival finds out she kept the king breathing, she is dead, she must follow. Fast forward to the Moretti estate. You and I are stepping into this nightmare together now. It sits over Boston Harbor like a modern fortress, armed with heavy steel gates and cold, bulletproof glass. It is a beautiful, terrifying trap. Serafina stands in the marble entryway, anchoring herself only to little Vivian's tiny hand. Listen closely to this life lesson. If someone offers you safety behind walls built for a violent war, you are already drowning in the deep end. That small hand gripping hers keeps Serafina from running into the night. Lucian, pale from blood loss, lays down iron laws: no leaving without guards, no speaking to outsiders. Serafina asks if she is a prisoner, and the Don smirks, calling it protection. A cold housekeeper marches her upstairs, but little Vivian begs her to stay. That desperate voice shatters Serafina's defenses. She caves, and the child beams. They step into the bedroom, and the wealth is suffocating. Heated floors, heavy silk, a massive bathtub. Serafina just collapses on the mattress, choking back tears. She is locked inside a beautiful cage. The life lesson here is simple. The softest silk sheets in the world cannot bring you any real peace if a violent man holds the key to your front door. Serafina scrubs her hands until the skin is raw, trying to wash away the phantom heat of Lucian's blood. A soft knock breaks the quiet. The door opens to reveal little Vivian, clutching her teddy bear, her eyes carrying profound heartbreak. Serafina pats the bed. Climbing up, the child drops a devastating thought. She whispers that heaven cannot be real, because if it was, her mother would have fought her way back. That just breaks out your heart. Serafina pulls her close, her voice shaking as she explains that sometimes people just cannot return. It is a brutal truth for a child. Here is the vital life lesson. Sometimes the ones who love us the most are the ones we are forced to lose, and we simply have to find the quiet strength to keep breathing just to honor their memory. Vivian looks up and asks if Serafina has ever lost someone. You and I are going to unpack this together, because the pain gets raw. Serafina swallows hard, admitting her little brother died when she was 17. The child asks if that grief is why she saves people, begging her not to run away when things get scary. Every instinct screams at Serafina to flee this dangerous mafia mansion. But feeling those tiny arms wrap around her, she lies and promises to stay. Now she is anchored in a house built on underworld crime. Right on cue, heavy boots echo in the hall, stopping dead outside her bedroom door. The life lesson is simple. Making promises out of pity can easily lock you inside a literal nightmare. So always weigh the true cost of your words before you speak them. The heavy footsteps linger, then slowly shuffle away. It is Lucian out in the dark. The man has lost half his blood and can barely stand, yet he drags himself through the halls just to guard his daughter. Serafina realizes this ruthless mobster hides a fragile heart, and uncovering it might cost her everything. Morning hits the cold estate like a gavel strike. Serafina wakes with Vivian curled at her side. For 5 short seconds, she pretends this is a normal life. But when the child wakes up beaming, thrilled that Serafina kept her promise, the guilt wraps around her throat like wire. Then a sharp, violent banging rattles the bedroom door. A simple life lesson for you. Never let yourself drift off and get comfortable in a toxic environment. Cold reality is always waiting to kick your door down. The housekeeper barks through the door that Mr. Moretti expects her for breakfast. It is a royal command. Getting ready, Serafina notices Vivian moving like a silent robot, entirely used to doing things in isolation. They walk down echoing hallways. Security cameras tracking every step. The dining room feels like a mafia war council. Lucian sits there like the Grim Reaper in a custom suit, flanked by armed men radiating pure menace. The moment Serafina enters, the room goes dead silent. Lucian coldly orders her to sit, But when his little girl sits beside him, his iron mask softens for just a heartbeat. It proves a simple life lesson. Endless power and money can buy you a giant fortress loaded with guards. But it cannot buy a genuinely warm and safe home for your family. Marcus leans in to discuss syndicate business, but Lucian shoots him a look so cold the room tastes like gunpowder. Plates of rich food arrive, but Serafina feels sick. 2 days ago she was eating ramen, now she is trapped with killers. Lucian coldly orders her to eat, dropping the terrifying fact that he knows she has only had coffee for 4 days. But what breaks Serafina's restraint is watching little Vivian. The child eats without making a sound, shrinking her body to stay invisible around these thugs. Serafina slams her fork down, demanding to know why his daughter is terrified to even breathe. Here is a solid life lesson. Children soak up the energy around them. If you raise them in a house thick with constant fear, they will erase their own shadows just to survive. The entire table freezes. Marcus looks ready to melt away while the other killers stare quietly at their plates. Lucian's jaw tightens, but Serafina holds her ground. She tells the boss he runs a prison, not a home. Lucian forces himself to stand, his wounded body shaking in pain. Instantly, every enforcer reaches for their concealed steel. The room turns to ice. Instead of exploding, Lucian calmly orders Vivian upstairs. Hearing her tiny footsteps fade away feels like a ticking time bomb. With the child gone, Lucian glares at Serafina, stating she knows nothing about his dark reality. Here is a valuable life lesson. Speaking truth to power is undeniably brave, but you must always be prepared for the fallout when you back a dangerous man into a corner. Serafina fires back. She tells him his daughter is so starved for affection she clings to total strangers and calls them mommy. Lucian growls, insisting that keeping his child alive is true love. Serafina does not flinch, calling survival the bare minimum. You and I have to respect her fearlessness here. Lucian closes the distance. His bandages are soaking with fresh blood because he refuses to rest. He leans into her face, claiming he is no tragic hero. He is exactly the monster he chose to be. Unblinking, Serafina looks him in the eye and tells him to choose better. The tension in the room is suffocating. A powerful life lesson emerges. You can never save someone who is entirely committed to their own destructive choices, no matter how much you want to fix them. Lucian backs away, dropping a chilling ultimatum. He orders his men to guard Serafina, forbidding her from leaving. Walking away, he whispers a final warning, telling her not to make him regret keeping her breathing. He exits with his killers, leaving her stunned. Trapped in this dark compound, she must learn the rules of survival fast. Never wander into the East Wing. Never ask about the bloodstains on the floor. Ignore the heavy locked doors. She tries her absolute best to fade into the walls. But little Vivian tracks her down like a shadow everywhere she goes. It is sweet but deeply terrifying. Here is your simple life lesson. When you ignore blazing red flags just to play the savior, you will inevitably wake up, locked inside a dangerous cage of your own making. Let us step into this freezing cliffside garden together. Little Vivian trails after Serafina, begging for a story. Serafina skips the fairy tales, choosing instead to spin raw truths about everyday people pulling each other out of the dark. The girl is mesmerized, quietly admitting her father only shares stories where the monsters win. Pulling the child close, Serafina whispers that in her reality, broken people fight back. High above, Lucian watches from his dark office window. The ruthless boss tells himself he is merely checking the perimeter, but his chest tightens with an unfamiliar panic. It brings us to a quiet realization. Sometimes the strongest armor you can forge for a shattered soul is just a single fragile spark of hope. Lucian fears no bullet, but he is terrified because Serafina is making his little girl laugh. That pure sound echoes through his cold house like a ghost. He watches his daughter embrace a stranger, and the underworld king is left entirely paralyzed. Suddenly, Marcus pushes the door open with grim news, blood on the docks. 4 of their men killed this, violent flares in Lucian's chest, but he swallows it down. In his brutal syndicate motion is a death sentence. He coldly orders his men to stand down. Marcus protests, warning that the streets will smell cowardice, begging his boss to retaliate. But Lucian simply stares out at the freezing snow, calculating his next move. True power is knowing exactly when to hold your fire, even when the whole world screams at you to pull the trigger. Lucian swears to wait in the shadows as long as necessary. 2 weeks crawl by, and then Serafina turns the cold house upside down. Little Vivian asks for a simple plate of pancakes, but the kitchen guards freeze. The head cook barks that the boss ordered strict oatmeal, with 0 exceptions. Serafina does not flinch. She stares the guard down, warning him that if he refuses, she will cook it herself. Minutes later, she is tossing flour across the counters, whisking batter from scratch. The ruthless syndicate staff watches her like she just pulled the pin on a grenade. They stand paralyzed, yet little Vivian is glowing with pure, unfiltered happiness. It is a beautiful reminder that sometimes you have to completely shatter the most rigid rules just to let a child actually be a kid for one single morning. The crime boss steps through the kitchen doorway and stops dead in his tracks. He stares at Serafina, who is dusted in flour, his little girl grinning, and his lethal guards frozen in panic. His voice is a dangerous rumble as he asks exactly what is going on. Serafina does not back down an inch. She casually flips a pancake, telling him his daughter deserves to be a child today, not a tiny soldier on strict rations. The entire room stops breathing, bracing for the dawn to erupt in violence. But then, the unthinkable happens. Lucian slowly pulls out a chair next to his daughter and asks Serafina to make enough batter for two. The cruelest man in the city just surrendered to a warm meal. It goes to show that even the coldest hearts can soften, if you possess the sheer courage to hold your ground for love. The heavy, unsaid truths of this meal hang in the air. They eat in a silence broken only by Vivian chattering about snowmen. Lucian just listens, truly hearing his child for the first time. When she runs off, he offers a quiet, genuine thanks. But Serafina sees right through his mask. She catches the gray exhaustion in his eyes and the painful tremor in his hands. He has been sneaking away for bandages, too proud to let his men see him bleed. She warns him he will tear his stitches. He tightens his jaw, swearing he is fine. Serafina simply points to the dark crimson blooming through the black fabric at his ribs. He looks down, muttering a bitter curse. You can build walls and act completely invincible, but ignoring the deep, hidden wounds you carry will always make you bleed out eventually. She has absolutely zero patience for his pride, ordering him to bring a medical kit to her room. 10 minutes later, a low knock echoes. She opens the door to find the king of the underworld standing there. His bare chest, a brutal map of old knife fights and bullet holes. His stitches are violently ripped open. When she asks what happened, he lies, blaming a slip on the stairs. She locks the door, forces him into a chair, and preps the needle. She warns him the alcohol will burn. He stares dead ahead, whispering that everything hurts. As she pours raw antiseptic into the open flesh, the mobster does not so much as blink. He just watches her hands with dark, intense eyes. It teaches us something deep about endurance. True strength is never about dodging the pain life throws at you. It is about holding your firm phalanxes when the agony threatens to break you apart. Serafina pulls the thread tight, murmuring that he easily could have bled out. His response is cold poison. He tells her that in his brutal world, showing weakness is a guaranteed death sentence. The honesty hangs heavy in the air. Then, she pushes a dangerous boundary, asking how Vivian lost her mother. The silence turns into a suffocating weight. After a long minute, his deep voice breaks. Crossfire. He stares at the floorboards and confesses that he ruined her. Muttering that everything he loves turns to ash. He genuinely believes he is a walking curse, but Serafina refuses to offer him pity. She snaps back, calling his tragic mindset total garbage, and she is entirely right. Blaming some cosmic curse for your tragedies is nothing but a cowardly excuse to stop fighting for the ones who still need you right now. Watch how a cornered man reacts when someone actually sees him. She demands to know if treating his daughter like a prisoner is his only plan. He growls that a golden cage is better than a tiny casket. Dropping the gauze, she tears away his heavy armor. She looks him dead in the eye, saying she sees the real man. A ghost who took 16 bullets and only keeps breathing so his girl is not left alone. A terrifying boss hiding his bleeding heart. He mutters that it is just survival instinct, but the truth is clear. Sometimes surviving and loving are the exact same violent act. He tests his stitches, offering her cash and a fake name to run from his reality. But here is the real takeaway. You can try to scare good people away to protect them, but stubborn loyalty stays put, no matter how dark the storm gets. Picture this moment. Serafina stares into the cold eyes of the city's most lethal man, flatly refusing to run. Lucian clenches his jaw, warning her she could vanish tonight, but she plays the heaviest card. She is staying for Vivian. A child playing alone in a mansion built on blood money. A dark smile tugs at Lucian's mouth as he calls her either insane or dangerously brave. He pulls on his shirt and walks out. Listen. Planting your feet and standing your ground for someone else is often the most beautifully terrifying thing you can do. Just 3 days later, absolute hell breaks loose. Perimeter alarms scream. Red strobe lights paint the walls. Heavy boots pound the floorboards, and through the echoing chaos, little Vivian screams in terror. Serafina does not freeze for a single second. She sprints directly into the center of the nightmare. She slides into the foyer, finding Lucian surrounded by armed killers. The boss looks carved from ice, gripping a heavy pistol. His lieutenant shouts about a massive perimeter breach. Serafina grabs Lucian's arm, her voice raw, screaming for Vivian. The Don barely blinks. He coldly states his little girl is already in the bunker, running her invasion drill. Just imagine a tiny child routinely practicing for a massacre. The radio crackles, confirming a rival hit squad is in the courtyard. Right then, you can physically see the ruthless monster wake up inside Lucian's soul. Sometimes you have to let your darkest demons off the leash just to keep your family breathing. He orders his men to seal the heavy doors. He shoots Serafina one final, hollow look, commands her to lock herself away with his daughter, and steps calmly into the absolute slaughter. Lucian orders her to keep the vault locked, and the shadows swallow him. Serafina is left alone in the cold hallway. The air is thick with the clatter of rifles and the drumbeat of her own racing pulse. She bolts for his study, tearing at the shelves until the bookcase swings wide to expose a heavy steel door. Having no code, she pounds on the metal, screaming the child's name. A torturous silence stretches before the heavy tumblers finally unlock. Vivian stands there, cheeks wet with tears, crushing a teddy bear to her chest. She looks up and bluntly asks if her dad is going to die. That innocent terror shatters the heart. Serafina swallows hard and lies, swearing he will be fine. We never really know what tomorrow holds. But sometimes true strength means wearing a brave face, when the terrible truth is just too heavy for a child to carry. Let us look closely at what happens next. Serafina promises the girl her father is practically bulletproof. She steps inside and the massive steel door hisses shut. The panic room is a cold concrete box with bare walls and a bank of security feeds. It breaks your heart realizing this little girl grew up watching her dad wage bloody wars from a monitor. Serafina pulls Vivian close on a cot, eyes glued to the flickering screens. You and I would be losing our minds right now. But the dark truth about this world is that your greatest protector is often the most terrifying monster in the room. On screen, Lucian glides through the east wing. He stalks the corridors like a shadow, weapon raised, moving with the precision of an executioner. Even Vivian whispers that her father looks scary. Serafina just holds the kid tighter, her own blood running completely cold. Come sit with me and let us step into the shadows. Little Vivian shivers in the cold, quietly insisting the terrifying man outside is still her father. On the monitors, Lucian's guards prowl like wolves before the screens cut to pitch black. Serafina holds her breath as a harsh red glare bleeds into the room. Then, the sound that freezes the blood. Heavy boots stop at their door, and the steel handle jerks violently. A muffled voice laughs, bragging they hold the blueprints to every hidden room. It is a profound truth we all face eventually. No matter how thick the walls you build around yourself, your unresolved demons always find a way inside. Left with no other choice, Serafina does the only thing she can, dragging the trembling child deep into the dark. The voice through the heavy door spits out their twisted terms. They demand the little girl in exchange for Lucian's syndicate. Serafina feels cold panic rising. She knows the vault will not hold, and the father is fighting his own battles far away. No one is riding to their rescue. It brings us to a harsh truth we all must learn. When you realize no one is coming to save you, you must become your own savior. Outside, the hitman orders his crew to blow the hinges, laughing off the order to keep the child alive. Serafina's blood turns to ice. She wildly searches the bare room for a weapon, finding nothing but a narrow air duct near the ceiling. Gripping Vivian by the shoulders, she softly whispers that it is time to be braver than she has ever been. A grinding drill bites into the steel as they tear through the lock. Serafina shoves a cot under the vent, lifting the trembling girl toward the ceiling. Vivian is far too small for this violence. Serafina locks eyes with her, ordering her to crawl into the dark and stay silent. When the child cries out, Serafina lies without blinking, promising she will be right behind her. It reminds us of a painful truth. Real love often means taking the heavy hit yourself so someone else can walk away untouched. Her hands shake as she forces the child into the shaft. She slams the grate shut, just as the vault door violently blows inward. Smoke floods the room as armed shadows rush inside. They find no prize. They only find a nurse standing alone in the quiet dark with her hands raised. The killer steps through the smoke, demanding the girl. Serafina stares straight through him, calmly stating she is gone. His fist crashes across her jaw, bringing the sharp taste of blood, but she holds her ground. Years of surviving the chaos of a trauma ward taught her how to absorb the impact. It shows us how the worst struggles of your past are often just quiet training for the battles waiting ahead. She spits the blood and repeats her answer. A thug points at the vent, cursing because he will never fit inside. The leader turns his dead eyes back to Serafina with an empty smile, telling her the trick was pointless. He reminds her his boss only needs the child alive. He casually raises his weapon, aiming right at her chest, as she simply closes her eyes in the dark. This is where the entire situation turns completely upside down. With cold steel against her forehead, Serafina makes her peace. A deafening roar tears through the room. But it is not her body hitting the floor. It is the hitman. Standing in the doorway, soaked in the grime of a dozen fights, is Lucian. 2 more shots, and the remaining men drop before they can blink. It is a harsh reminder. When you threaten someone's family, the universe will gladly unleash a monster to balance the scales. The mob boss looks at Serafina. The icy killer fades just enough to let the desperate father back in. She points to the vent. He lunges, violently ripping the metal away, screaming into the dark for his little girl. But only a terrible, hollow silence answers his call. Smoke rolls over the room, casting shadows across the bodies. As the silence becomes too heavy, a trembling voice echoes from the dusty shaft. Little Vivian peers out, telling her father she was brave, exactly as the nurse asked. Lucian pulls his daughter from the wall, burying his face in her hair. Over her shoulder, he meets Serafina's gaze in a silent exchange of deep gratitude, mixed with the bitter reality of his violent world. A guard steps through the wreckage, confirming the threats are gone. Lucian orders his men to sweep the grounds, never letting go of his child. It reveals a simple truth about human nature. You cannot pretend to live a soft life when your soul is built for conflict. You simply have to fiercely protect what matters most. Lucian hands the girl off to his enforcer. The second the heavy door closes, the soft father vanishes and the ruthless boss returns. Standing over the ruined floor, his voice goes dead. He explains that his rival Damien orchestrated this nightmare for brutal leverage. He stares at Serafina, welcoming her to the ugly reality of his world, warning that men like Damien never stop until the dirt covers them. This is the exact moment everything fractures. Serafina looks the hardened killer right in the eye and calmly tells him to put Damien in the ground first. The gentle healer just asked for blood. The life lesson here is deeply terrifying. If you spend enough time swimming in absolute darkness, you eventually stop running from the monsters and start thinking exactly like them. It is pure madness. Lucian expects the woman who dug hot lead out of his chest to preach about morality, but she is far past that. A broken laugh slips from her lips as she drops the heavy truth. The exact second she shoved a crying child into a metal tube to hide from killers, her innocence died. She demands he end this war before the girl pays the price. Lucian warns her the criminal underworld will warp her soul beyond repair. But she cuts his protective speech to ribbons, proving she is not a fragile thing made of glass. Here is the harsh reality we must all face. Sometimes, surviving a nightmare requires you to shatter the softest parts of yourself, just so you can build something entirely bulletproof. He looks at her, and finally sees the unbending steel. The tension in that ruined space is incredibly thick. Serafina holds his gaze, standing inches away from a massacre, and softly tells the devil himself that he should be terrified of her. It is a savage, beautiful moment. Lucian finally drops the shield. He warns her if she crosses this line, there is no walking back. His face painted with blood, he presses a weapon into her hands. She takes the cold steel. Her fingers shake, but her chin stays high. He runs her through the mechanics, instructing her to aim for the center and pull until the threat is gone. She asks him to train her, sealing her fate completely. It proves a difficult truth. Sometimes you have to bury the person you used to be to survive the storm that is coming. She is no longer just a healer. For the first time tonight, a genuine smile touches Lucian's mouth, reaching his tired eyes. He swears to teach her the brutal art of survival, right after he buries the men on his floor and explains the violence to his little girl. He walks away, leaving her standing in the ruined room with a loaded weapon. This is the ultimate point of no return. Any normal person would be ill, but instead, a freezing armor of absolute clarity settles over Serafina's mind. She checks the safety with a loud click, conceals the steel, and walks out to find Vivian. It teaches us a beautiful lesson. When the world goes pitch black, true strength is simply showing up for the innocent souls who depend on you. Even as she slips into the shadow of the underworld, she knows that child needs a guardian who will never flinch. You and I know a storm never truly passes, it just regroups. 3 days later, Damien sits in his penthouse, opening a package. Inside is a photo of Serafina at the range, the paper target completely blown out. On the back, Lucian left a brutal message, daring the rival to try his luck again. Damien just smiles a cold, hollow smile, sketching out the flames of war. Far away in a concrete basement, the sharp scent of gunpowder hangs in the air. Serafina's hands are now rock steady. She fires round after round, tearing the center mass to shreds. Lucian stands close, his deep voice guiding her aim. Here is the final truth to take with you tonight. If you stand your ground and practice facing the dark, eventually, your raw fear will forge itself into undeniable power. Stick with me because you and I are stepping back into a world that does not forgive. The gunshot fades into a heavy silence. Serafina lowers the barrel, studying the hole punched through the paper. Lucian steps from the dark, warning her that her mind is still too loud. Hesitation here means a swift grave. When she confesses her instinct is to bolt, he gently takes the heavy weapon from her hands. The graze of their skin carries an electric charge. This estate has spent weeks peeling away her identity as a healer to forge a weapon. He whispers that her hunger for violence should terrify her. It points to a haunting life lesson. Sometimes, the most frightening transformations we endure are exactly what we need to survive the longest nights. They are locked in a lethal waltz now. She tells herself she is only staying to protect little Vivian, but the reality is heavier. The rush of the underworld has seeped into her veins. Trading pristine scrubs for the cold weight of a firearm is a shattering evolution. Against all logic, this shadowy syndicate estate feels like home. The quiet in the halls is deafening. Lucian notes that their rival has been a ghost lately. In their world, silence is just the deep breath before a hurricane. When Serafina calmly suggests executing their enemy, her dark pragmatism makes Lucian smirk. She rationalizes that she still saves lives, just by taking others. It reveals a tragic lesson. Our life purpose can mutate into something entirely unrecognizable, but it remains ours to carry. Suddenly, Marcus throws open the heavy door, his face pale. The storm is here. They rush up the grand staircase, expecting an armed hitman, but find a very different kind of monster. A corporate shark in an immaculate suit waits in the office, radiating the cold confidence of a predator. Lucian reminds her she is trespassing, but she turns with unblinking eyes. She introduces herself as the lawyer for the Ashford estate, and the room goes cemetery still. The grandmother passed away years ago, yet her trap was perfectly laid. The lawyer slides a court order across the desk, demanding temporary custody of Vivian. The temperature in the room plummets. Lucian growls a dark warning, but the woman does not flinch. This brings us to a harsh midnight lesson. The most devastating threats in life rarely arrive with heavy artillery. Sometimes they walk right through your front door, armed with nothing but a simple piece of paper. Serafina watches closely, bracing for the untouchable boss to shatter. Instead, Lucian radiates a terrifying, tightly controlled fury. He quietly demands her legal grounds, and the lawyer drops the blade. She lists the near kidnapping, the armed guards, and a flood of anonymous tips. She flashes a wicked smile, refusing to name the informant. But anyone analyzing this knows exactly whose shadow is in this room. It is Damien. This is his calculated strike to gut his rival without firing a bullet. She gives Lucian 72 hours to surrender his daughter, or federal marshals will breach the gates. Lucian whispers, amazed she thinks she will leave alive. Here is a truth carved in stone. Push a protective father into a desperate corner, and he will gladly reduce the world to ash just to keep his child safe. Marcus steps forward, ready to play the violent enforcer. But this lawyer is absolute ice. She warns that if she misses her check-in, the civil order instantly becomes a federal kidnapping warrant. 72 hours, she turns and vanishes. The second that heavy door clicks shut, the dam finally breaks. Lucian grabs a crystal decanter and hurls it against the wall, shattering it into dust. Marcus reaches out to steady his oldest friend, but Lucian snarls, banishing him from the room. Serafina stands silently, watching this untouchable king crack under the weight of his crown. It proves a painful truth about our deepest struggles. The hardest obstacles in life are rarely the ones we can defeat with our fists. True strength is found in holding onto your mind when the entire world is built to break you. The silence in the ruined office is suffocating. Serafina voices the nightmare they are all avoiding. Damien is using the cold gears of the legal system to crush them. For the first time, this fearless boss looks paralyzed. When asked for his next move, Lucian admits he is lost. Later, Serafina finds Vivian curled up in the massive library, clutching a worn teddy bear, unaware her universe is collapsing. Serafina sits beside her to deliver the terrible blow. Children always feel the change in the weather, and the little girl's smile instantly fades. Serafina tells Vivian she has to leave her father to stay safe. It is an agonizing reality, but it leaves us with a profound lesson. Sometimes, the only way to protect the soul you love most is to make the devastating choice to let them walk away. This little girl is too young to understand the syndicate, yet her survival instincts are razor sharp. Vivian looks up, tears brimming in her eyes, and asks if she has to leave because of the bad men. She knows her father is the king who is supposed to slay the monsters. Serafina tries offering the usual hollow comforts, murmuring that grown-ups do complicated things, but the child shatters, clinging to her and begging not to be left alone. Holding this sobbing girl in the dim light, something fundamental inside Serafina snaps. The healer dies, and a dark tactician wakes up, ready to calculate any brutal path to keep them safe. It brings us to an undeniable life lesson. Love does not soften your edges, it sharpens them, turning you into an absolute monster for the people who anchor your heart. Midnight falls over the estate like a heavy shroud. Lucian sits alone in his dim office, nursing dark whiskey. Surrounded by useless legal documents, he looks like a fallen emperor watching his legacy burn. Serafina steps from the shadows, pitching a desperate escape plan. She urges him to grab Vivian, forge new names, and flee before the clock stops, but Lucian slowly shakes his head. Raising a child while constantly staring over your shoulder is not a life, he says. It is just a slower death. He realizes his vast wealth and loyal soldiers are entirely worthless now. It is a bitter lesson that catches up to us all. You can never simply buy your way out of the consequences you built with your own two hands. Staring into his empty glass, he finally believes he is the monster the world claims he is. Serafina refuses to let him drown in his guilt. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? Damien is hiding behind the law because he knows a straight street war would leave him in a body bag. Standing in the dim light, she delivers the most audacious strategy of their lives. She tells Lucian to surrender his entire empire. Hand Damien the throne in exchange for dropping the custody battle. Lucian looks at her as if she has lost her mind, but her eyes are dead serious. It is only a phantom surrender. The very second Vivian is secure, they will take everything back with ruthless prejudice. This is where we learn a vital strategy for survival. Never be afraid to deliberately lose a single battle, especially if it sets the perfect, devastating trap to win the entire war. The air in the room is thick enough to choke on. Lucian stares at her, realizing she is pitching a vicious play, pulled directly from his own dark history. He murmurs that she has changed. She fires right back that she learned from the devil himself. The chemistry between them is like a jagged wire, buzzing with chaos. Lucian warns her that this dark path has no return trip. Executing this means unleashing a massive bloodbath against anyone who threatened his little girl. Serafina does not blink. She coldly replies that the graves were going to be dug anyway, so they might as well put the right people in them. It is a haunting but true life lesson. When the safety of your family is on the line, you must surround yourself with people who will match your exact level of darkness. Picture the heavy silence of the night. Serafina is pushed to the edge, preparing to cross the final boundary separating the healer from the criminal. Her hands shake, but her resolve is iron. She dials her old clinic mentor, Dr. Chen. He picks up, his voice heavy with exhaustion, demanding to know where she vanished to. But Serafina has no time for the ghosts of her old life. She begs for a highly illegal favor. She needs the sealed medical records of a deceased patient named Margaret Ashford. Chen freezes, the panic clear in his tone as he asks what kind of trouble she is buried in. Serafina just radiates a terrifying, quiet desperation. We learn a hard truth very quickly here. Fierce loyalty will always force you to eventually burn the quiet bridges of your past. Against his better judgment, the tired doctor gives in and pulls up the file. Margaret passed away 3 years ago, but hidden in the fine print is a revelation that stops the heart. The executor of her estate is a lawyer named Richard Voss. The name slams into Serafina like a physical blow. Why? Because Richard is Damien's own brother. The grand curtain falls on the illusion. This nightmare was never about a grieving grandmother. It is Damien, wearing a cheap legals, trying to surgically tear Lucian's heart out. Serafina ends the call and carries this venomous secret back. She drops the bomb on Lucian, and the temperature in the room plummets. His eyes turn to absolute, unforgiving ice. A harsh psychological lesson remains. The darkest truths always demand a heavy, violent toll. Let us examine the reality of a rigged game. Playing by the rules when the deck is marked is simply a slow way to die. But a sudden revelation flips the board. Lucian discovers Margaret was never the blood grandmother. She was merely the mother of his first wife. a woman gone long before Vivian drew her first breath. Richard Voss built this custody claim out of dust and bitter lies. In the mind of Lucian, cold logic snaps into red-hot vengeance. He dials the men who make problems disappear, ordering a scorched earth crusade. He demands every financial shadow Richard touched in the last 6 months. It leaves us with a brutal life lesson tonight. When an enemy tries to burn your house down, you do not just put out the fire, you burn their entire city to the ground, leaving nothing but ash. Lucian gave his enforcers 48 hours to bury Richard so deeply that the sun would forget his name. But 36 hours in, the operation turned to ash. Serafina was reading softly to Vivian when the perimeter alarm shattered the silence. Marcus slammed the door open, his face the color of bone, a heavy weapon shaking in his grip. Federal's agents were already flooding the iron gates. Serafina scooped the terrified child into her arms, sprinting through the dark mansion. She searched desperately for Lucian, but he was miles away, completely blind to the raid. You and I know how fast the illusion of safety shatters. Life teaches us a bitter lesson here. The exact moment we finally drop our guard is always the second. The wolves break through the fence and tear our world apart. They reached the heavy safe room doors, but fate had already closed the snare. Federal marshals cornered them, weapons gleaming coldly under the red emergency lights. Marcus ran the brutal mathematics of survival in his head and dropped his gun to the floor. Rough hands flooded the room, dragging Serafina backward. She screamed until her throat tore, clutching Vivian to her chest, begging them to read the protective custody order. But they felt absolutely no pity. They pried the weeping little girl from her desperate grip, finger by agonizing finger. Vivian shrieked, reaching back as they hauled her out into the cold night. It leaves us with a painful truth to remember. Sometimes, the rules meant to protect us become blunt weapons, and justice is simply a ghost we chase in the dark. Serafina fought like a cornered lioness, clawing wildly at their tactical vests. Then, an agent drove a heavy fist into her stomach. She collapsed onto the cold marble, gasping for air, forced to watch them carry the child away. Above the chaos, Vivian cried out for her mama. She did not call her Serafina, she called her mama. That single word shattered her spirit worse than the physical blow ever could. Dragged into an interrogation room and bound to a chair, she faced an arrogant agent named Ramirez. The woman smiled, pretending they had just rescued a little girl from a monster. The life lesson here is incredibly sharp. The deepest, most permanent wounds never come from the enemies who strike us. They come from the innocent voices we are entirely powerless to protect. Ramirez opened a thick file and went straight on the attack. She treated Serafina like a naive nurse who fell under the dark spell of a mob boss. But Serafina refused to play the victim. Her eyes burned with defiance as she fired back, stating she was the only thing keeping that child alive. She explained the custody battle was a ghost story, a legal scam cooked up by a dead woman and her fake estate. Ramirez just offered a condescending sigh, viewing her as a tragic pawn lost in the underworld. Yet, Serafina held her ground, demanding to know where they took her little girl. Here is a vital truth about human nature. Never mistake quiet compassion for weakness. When you threaten the people they deeply love, that gentle heart will instantly turn to absolute, unbreakable iron. Ramirez dismissed the forged documents, resting on the arrogant belief that the system never fails. Then, the real nightmare arrived. Another agent stepped in, whispering urgently in the ear of Ramirez. The smugness drained from her face, replaced by cold tension. She delivered a devastating blow. Lucian was missing. His car was found abandoned by the harbor, his entire security detail wiped out. Serafina felt her blood turn to ice as the pieces clicked together. The federal raid, the fake paperwork. Stick with me here, because this is where everything breaks. It was never a custody battle. It was a snare, perfectly designed to strip away the king and his armor. The life lesson is chilling. The most dangerous traps in this world are always disguised as standard rules and procedures. The true architect of this misery was Damien. He weaponized the custody drama to trigger a federal raid, stripping away the guards to snatch the underworld king off the street. Serafina leaned across the metal table, pleading with the agents to see the truth. She begged them to realize Damien was the mastermind behind the chaos. But they remained stubbornly blind, suffocated by endless protocol. Ramirez coldly locked her down as a material witness, trapping her inside the iron jaws of the legal system. The life lesson here is one we must all remember. The most terrifying monsters do not hide in dark, forgotten alleys. They wear tailored suits, they masterfully manipulate the halls of justice, and they smile a charming smile while they tear your entire world completely apart. Picture the pure agony of this ride. They shoved Serafina into a dark sedan, speeding through Boston. She bit her lip until she tasted copper just to stop from screaming. Vivian was gone. Lucian had vanished. Everything she protected was erased in 60 minutes. They dragged her into a federal building, booking her like a hardened
Mugster.
Prince. Mugshots. The cold camera flash, she gave them nothing but silence. Tossed into a concrete holding cell, the heavy door suddenly swung open. Standing there was Catherine Wells, the vicious lawyer who ignited the custody war. Serafina clenched her fists ready to draw blood, but Catherine spoke a single name: Vivian. Here is a simple life lesson. When the devil holds the keys to someone you love, you swallow your pride and you listen. Catherine dropped a devastating truth into the silent cell. The little girl refused to eat, weeping endlessly for her mama. The heart of Serafina broke, but Catherine revealed a darker reality. She never worked for the grandmother. Her true employer was Damien Voss. He paid a fortune to fabricate the custody case, planning to hand Vivian to the syndicate, making her vanish like smoke. Lucian would never see his child again. The forged paperwork was officially stamped. By morning, Vivian would take a one-way flight into the abyss. Serafina saw nothing but red. She lunged, grabbed the corrupt lawyer by the collar, and slammed her against the solid concrete. The life lesson is undeniable. Never back a desperate mother into a corner. When her child is at risk, all logic fades and she will fight with terrifying violence. Serafina screamed, demanding to know how she could sell an innocent child to a monster. Catherine looked away in shame and laid out the endgame. You and I need to look closely at this staggering cruelty. Damien wanted to break Lucian, but he found the second weakness of the king, Serafina. He offered a sick trade. Serafina surrenders to him, and the little girl goes free. Lucian gets his daughter back, but loses the woman he loves. If she refuses, Vivian vanishes into the dark. Total checkmate. Serafina began to tremble. She looked at the lawyer and asked the heaviest question. If I agree to this, do I die? Catherine could not meet her eyes. Probably, she whispered. Here is a painful life lesson. Sometimes, the only way to save the people you love is to willingly place yourself on the sacrificial altar. Catherine coldly admitted casualties were simply part of the business. Serafina slowly released her collar. Her mind tried to calculate survival rates, but this was a mafia war, not a hospital. Between her own life and the future of a little girl, there was zero debate. Serafina agreed to the fatal trade, but laid down ironclad demands. When Catherine pushed back, Serafina silenced her. Vivian goes to Lucian tonight, full custody, all charges erased. Then came the most tragic command. She ordered the lawyer to lie to Lucian. Tell him I walked away willingly, so he will not burn the city down trying to rescue me. Life teaches us an agonizing truth here. True strength is never found in wielding power. It is found when you willingly surrender your life to shield the innocent from the coming fire. The lawyer finished a hushed call and delivered the final blow. Serafina had to leave immediately. No embraces, no tender goodbyes. The cell door groaned open, revealing the enforcers of Damien instead of marshals. She stepped into the abyss, leaving behind the little girl she loved, and the broken king who captured her heart. They shoved her into a windowless van, and she vanished into the night. Fast forward 12 agonizing hours. Lucian dragged himself into consciousness, choking on his own blood. He was strung up in a damp warehouse, his wrist fractured, his shoulder ripped from its socket. Standing above him, wearing a smile of pure venom, was Damien. Here is the tragic life lesson of sacrifice. Sometimes, walking willingly into the darkness to save another soul only guarantees the shadows will swallow you whole. Lucian chokes on his blood, a hollow rattle demanding his daughter. Damien smiles, dropping a psychological guillotine. The child is safe, the legal war erased. Lucian freezes. Why would a predator open the cage? Leaning in, Damien whispers the venomous truth. He found a way to annihilate Lucian without touching the girl. Serafina paid the ransom with her own freedom. She traded her life for the child, and Damien buried her so deep in the underworld, she is now a ghost. He leaves Lucian breathing just to let guilt rot his soul. Lucian lunges like a rabid wolf, desperate to tear his tormentor apart, but the steel chains hold fast. The tragedy here is painfully clear. The heaviest chains we ever wear are not made of iron, but of the silent sacrifices others endure just to keep us breathing. Let us unpack this moment together, you and I, because this is where the knife truly twists. Damien leans closer to deliver the fatal blow, whispering that Serafina begged Lucian to never come looking for her. If he disobeys, Damien promises to wipe them both from existence. He walks away, arrogant in his belief that a shattered heart is the ultimate defeat. For the first time, The mythic underworld king completely breaks. But here is the fascinating part of human resilience. He only stays broken for 17 minutes. 17 minutes kneeling in the wreckage of his life before the grief vaporizes into blinding rage. The monster wakes up hungrier than before. It is a harsh reality we all face eventually. Sometimes you must hit absolute rock bottom before discovering the terrifying strength needed to finally strike back. Leaving this man alive was the most fatal miscalculation Damien could make. You never leave a wounded king breathing. Lucian leans against a concrete pillar, forcing his dislocated shoulder into the cold stone. The joint snaps back with a sixth crunch. White fire erupts behind his eyes, but he swallows the scream. His wrists are bound tight, yet his skin is so slick with fresh blood that he simply tears himself free. He shreds his own flesh, entirely numb to the physical damage, driven only by the terrifying inferno in his chest. As the strains snap, he staggers upward. Broken ribs, a fractured skull. He is running on fumes in sheer fury. But here is a timeless truth. You do not need perfect conditions or full strength to win your battles. You simply need a stubborn, unyielding refusal to stay down on the ground. Notice the blinding arrogance of the antagonist. Damien actually leaves the heavy door unlocked, genuinely believing Lucian is too spiritually broken to ever turn the handle. Instead of weeping in the dark, Lucian steps out into the freezing wind, a dark smile cracking his split lips. He heads straight for his own estate, a property now swarming with federal agents. Soaked in his own blood, he walks right through the front door, completely ignoring the tactical weapons aimed at his chest. The agents slowly lower their guns. They recognize the true authority in this city. He marches past them, scattering the panicked state workers, like frightened birds to find his daughter. There is a brutal poetry to this moment. Never corner a wounded animal, and never mistake a broken man for a defeated one. That is exactly when they become the most lethal force in the room. Consider the emotional weight of this scene. Little Vivian sits quietly, entirely wrecked, clutching a battered stuffed bear. Her eyes are red and swollen. When she looks up and whispers for her father, you can almost hear the jagged edges of his soul shattering all over again. Ignoring the agony of his fractured ribs, he pulls her into a fierce embrace. She clings to him as if he is the only thing holding her fractured world together. Then, with pure innocence, she asks if he will save Serafina. Lucian hears the echo of Damien's fatal threat, but staring into his daughter's eyes, he promises to bring their family back. The profound lesson here is undeniable. True courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to show up for your loved ones when the lights go out. 2 hours later, he is striking a heavy bag with a terrifying, mechanical precision. Every punch he throws radiates agony through his shattered chest, but that physical torment pales next to the suffocating silence echoing through his home. Marcus steps into the dim light of the gym to deliver the briefing. The authorities have cleared out, and Vivian is secure. Then comes the heavy question. What is their next tactical move? Lucian turns around slowly, looking like a phantom. Fresh blood is soaking straight through his white bandages. We find her, he rasps, ignoring the impossible odds. Marcus attempts to be the voice of reason, warning that Damien is praying for a rescue mission so he can execute Serafina immediately. But Lucian understands the cruel mechanics of the underworld. She is bait, which means she is breathing. Here is the undeniable truth. Real loyalty means walking willingly into the flames, knowing the people you love are always worth the burn. Lucian stands perfectly still in his armory, surrounded by cold steel and the weight of his past sins. He grants Damien 48 hours to drink in his hollow victory. This is the suffocating calm before an apocalyptic storm. Gripping a firearm, his mind locks onto Serafina, cementing a brutal vow. Damien thought he was dismantling a rival syndicate, but he merely watered a seed of vengeance with his own hands. Take this lesson to heart. You never push a man who has already accepted the loss of his own soul. Miles away, Serafina wakes to a pitch-black void. Her skull throbs, plastic cuts into her wrists, and the air reeks of diesel and salt water. The floor rocks gently beneath her. Trapped in a dark cabin, she realizes the chilling truth. This is not some sloppy underworld kidnapping. It is a terrifyingly precise operation. The iron door groans outward, revealing a man in a tailored suit who screams of expensive corporate muscle. He notes she is awake, but when she demands their location, he simply smirks. Watch how Serafina operates under pressure. She quietly tests the tension of the plastic biting into her wrists. She knows they need her alive, so she leverages her only asset. Staring dead into the enforcer's hollow eyes, she calmly offers to sell out Lucian's empire, promising offshore accounts and codes. The suit chuckles, amused that she would betray her protector. Her response is ice cold. She admits she will do whatever is necessary to survive today, just to ensure she can burn them tomorrow. It is a brilliant pivot. Sometimes, cloaking a deception in brutal naked honesty is the absolute best way to make your enemy swallow the lie. You and I both know she is not some helpless pawn. She spent a month surviving the toxic reality of Lucian's underworld, and those bitter instincts are activating. Scanning her dark cage, she accepts the door as solid iron, but spots a jagged bolt protruding from the wall. Without wasting a breath, she drags her wrists against the metal, sawing through the thick plastic fiber by agonizing fiber. The takeaway here is a harsh human truth. You cannot simply sit in the dark waiting for a savior. You must fight to save yourself first. Back on the mainland, the 48 hours evaporate. Lucian's team rips through Damien's financial records, untangling shell corporations and phantom deeds. That is when they uncover the chilling reality. Damien did not strike out of sudden anger. He had been quietly orchestrating this total underworld war for months. Kidnapping Serafina was merely the opening gambit. Marcus delivers the grim report. Damien is aggressively consuming territory, raiding 5 operations before noon. He genuinely believes he broke the king. Lucian simply stares at the map with dead, terrifying gray eyes, telling his men to let Damien enjoy his illusion. The only thing that matters is her, tracking a phantom vessel crawling up the coastline. Lucian orders his crew to liquidate every account and deploy every soldier to search the private docks. Marcus hesitates, asking how to avoid catching Serafina in the inevitable crossfire. Lucian slowly raises his head. The absolute void in his gaze forces Marcus to step back. By any means necessary, he whispers. True devotion means you will happily burn the rest of the world to ash just to keep your loved ones warm. As the third sunrise bleeds over the city, the team strikes gold. They trace her to a fortified shoreline estate, shielded by Damien's corrupt brother. Satellite feeds reveal towering walls and enough private muscle to launch a small war. Lucian does not wait for confirmation. He feels her presence in his bones. Damien believed that hiding behind legal shell games and iron gates would insulate him from consequence, but his logic is fatally flawed. The defensive phase is over. Lucian selects 12 lethal enforcers, men who would gladly march into the abyss for him. The room is dead silent as they strap into ballistic armor. Lucian racks the slide on the exact weapon he used to violently carve out his syndicate decades ago. The core lesson here is timeless. Arrogance will always render a man completely blind to his own demise. The ghost is officially hunting. Let us ride with them, you and I, through the freezing dark. Lucian lays out the rules of engagement. They breach like phantoms. Armed guards go into the ground, zero mercy. As the SUVs tear through the night, Lucian drowns in regret. He remembers how Serafina pulled bullets from his flesh, transforming a hollow mansion into a home. The crushing realization hits him. He never actually told her he loved her. He only knew how to communicate in violence. It is a deeply human tragedy. Waiting for the perfect moment to tell someone how you feel is a massive mistake. You must speak your heart while they are still beside you. Staring out the glass, he swears that if she dies tonight, he will scorch the earth. The massive estate bleeds out of the fog. The tactical team splinters into the shadows. The compound's power grid goes completely dead. It is finally showtime. Picture a scene of absolute orchestrated chaos. Lucia and Marcus barrel a transport truck straight toward the iron gates, serving themselves up as the ultimate decoy. They draw every armed guard away from the silent team, slipping into the harbor. Lucien grips the wheel, inhaling a ragged breath as he pictures Serafina smiling at his daughter. He gives the signal, and the estate power grid dies instantly. Before backup generators can click on, the squad swarms the cold docks. Lucien slams the accelerator, driving 2 tons of steel through the barricade. Sparks fly and gunfire erupts. Yet, moving through the smoke, Lucien is terrifyingly calm, slipping into the deadly grace of a lifelong predator. The lesson here is profound. Never force a desperate man into the shadows, because that is exactly where he learns how to hunt you. You and I know what it means to bleed for a cause, do we not? 2 guards hit the floor before they even register the threat. Marcus sweeps right, covering the corridor with heavy fire. Lucia moves through the smoke like a ghost returning to his tragic history. A time when survival meant being the most brutal man in the room. A stray round snaps past his ear, but he remains unfazed, dropping another figure in the haze. The front doors blast inward, splintering into the night. Lucien clears the entryway as echoes of war ring from the wings. He charges up a massive staircase, swallowing the blinding agony of fractured ribs tearing at his lungs. Reaching the top, He stares down an empty, cavernous hall. The brutal truth we must all face is simple. Sometimes you just have to walk through absolute agony to pull the ones you love out of the fire. The radio erupts with dead static. The wings are clear. Lucien shatters 2 doors before finding the third locked tight. He buries 3 heavy rounds into the deadbolt and kicks the wood apart. Inside, Serafina is strapped to a chair, battered but breathing. Their eyes lock across the destroyed room, sharing a silent storm of relief and violent vendetta. She whispers that he actually came for her. He offers a grim smile, noting he was never good at following orders. He slices her restraints, and she collapses against his chest. He holds her, weapon still aimed at the hallway. She looks at his ruined face and softly remarks that he looks terrible. He smirks, whispering, "It has been a very long week. Think about this profoundly. True loyalty means willingly stepping into the absolute worst darkness, just to carry someone safely into the light." Despite the roar of gunfire tearing through the walls, Serafina manages a faint smile. But Lucien is pure, cold focus. They must move immediately. This massive estate was nothing but a hollow decoy. Marcus bursts into the doorway, eyes wild with panic. Federal agents in helicopters are exactly 5 minutes away from swarming the property. Lucien mutters a dark curse, realizing Damien orchestrated this entire trap. "Now stick with me here, because the true nightmare is just beginning." They sprint through the blood-stained halls, finally reaching the back extraction point. They stand a mere 10 feet from absolute freedom. Suddenly, Damien steps out from the pitch-black shadows, pressing the cold steel of a pistol directly to Serafina's head. The psychological lesson here is deeply brutal. Never drop your armor until you are completely, undeniably out of the dark. The night air goes completely dead, everyone freezes. Damien smiles with the empty eyes of a true psychopath. Lucien demands he let her go, his voice vibrating with dangerous rage. But Damien only laughs. He warns that if they shoot, his dying reflex will pull the trigger, taking Serafina down with him. It is a paralyzing standoff. The rhythmic thud of choppers grows louder, mere seconds away from lighting up the dock. Damien orders them to drop their weapons. Lucien tries to call the bluff, reminding him that killing her ruins his sick revenge. Damien just smirks, but Serafina watches Lucien. She sees the cold math running behind his eyes, hunting for an impossible angle. He spent a month teaching her how to survive this violent life. Now, it is time to act. True strength is learning to save yourself when the universe leaves you with absolutely zero options. She stares into Lucien's eyes, whispers not to trust her, and instantly drops to the concrete, snapping Damien's line of fire wide open. It is a breathtaking gamble. Lucien squeezes his trigger before she even hits the floor. The round rips straight through Damien's shoulder. Marcus and the Kruba open fire, lighting the crime lord up. Damien crashes hard, bleeding out into the shadows but still breathing. Lucien yanks Serafina up, and they sprint toward the speedboats, just as federal choppers breach the skyline. Loudspeakers scream from above, but they slam the throttles forward. Gunfire shreds the dark water as they rocket away into the night. Ditching the boats, they jump into getaway cars and tear back toward Boston, consumed by the violent tremors of a massive adrenaline crash. The profound takeaway? Sometimes taking a reckless, unimaginable risk is the only way to escape an impossible grave. Inside the speeding car, Lucien growls that her stunt was incredibly stupid. She fires right back, pointing out that it worked. He warns her they easily could have died, but Serafina drops a haunting truth. She tells him that dying is just a permanent part of their dark reality now, so they might as well risk it for something that actually matters. Lucien stares at her in the dim dashboard light. He realizes the innocent nurse who once saved his life is gone. She has been forged in the exact same brutal fires as him, and he deeply respects it. He quietly vows to burn Damien's entire syndicate to ash. Suddenly, Marcus snaps a terrified look into the rearview mirror, his face washed in pure dread. Their federal mole just tipped him off. Massive warrants were just issued. They are now the most hunted targets in Boston. The undeniable truth is this. When life backs you into the darkest corner, you have no choice but to stand tall and fight your way out. We are looking at absolute madness tonight, you and I. Lucien is consumed by a relentless fury. Damien is literally bleeding out in a sterile hospital bed, surrounded by an army of federal agents. Yet the crime boss is still trying to play chess. Serafina quietly asks what their next move is. But Lucien? He does not care about the flashing sirens or the badges. He wants to march right into that hospital tonight and finish the bloody job. He is cashing in every underworld favor, pulling every trigger left in his arsenal. The law is swarming the cold streets of Boston, but Lucien is locked into his tragic vendetta. Here is a vital life lesson. Sometimes, overthinking is the absolute worst enemy you can have. When your back is pressed hard against the wall, you do not sit in the shadows planning. You bring overwhelming force, burn the entire board down to the ground, and sort through the ashes when the smoke clears. They hit the safe house by noon, and Lucien fades into the shadows to prepare for outright war. Meanwhile, Serafina rushes inside and finds little Vivian sitting across from a cold government social worker. For a heavy, agonizing second, nobody in the room breathes. Then Vivian breaks, launching her tiny body across the floor, sobbing and screaming for her mother. It is a suffocating emotional gut punch. The kid is terrified, crying about the scary suits and endless questions. The worker is just scribbling notes like a machine, but Serafina totally ignores. Sure, she drops to her knees, fiercely clutching the trembling girl. Vivian begs to know if they will ever leave her again. Serafina holds her tightly, swearing she is staying forever. Listen to me, because this truly matters. True loyalty is not just about destroying your enemies. It is about showing up for the fragile souls who need you most when their entire world falls apart. Let us look at this piece by piece. Inside the safe house, a social worker warns Serafina she is breaking custody laws. Serafina does not blink. With eyes like shattered ice, she tells the woman to make an arrest or step away. Even little Vivian senses this shift. Whispering her mother is sharper now, just like her father. Serafina softens, asking if that is bad. Vivian shakes her head no, knowing sharpness keeps you safe. Outside, Lucien gathers his crew to plan retaliation against Damien, who is guarded by federal agents. A shootout means certain death, so Lucien chooses a tactic alien to the crime world. He will expose the raw truth. It teaches us a powerful reality. When trapped in a life built on lies, the unvarnished truth becomes your most devastating weapon. Lucien sends a massive file to every news outlet in Boston. It holds 3 years of hard evidence, tearing the veil off Damien's syndicate. It exposes the murders, the dirty money, and the brother who hid the bodies. Marcus stares at the screen, stunned. Leaking this destroys Damien's federal protection overnight. The agents will have to arrest him or face prison. Lucien is turning the justice system into a weapon. A crew member warns that pressing send will burn every bridge they have left. Lucien looks around with chilling confidence, stating the city can have itself back only after Damien pays his debt. He hits send. The heavy lesson here is perfectly clear. If you are ever forced to burn your bridges to the ground, make sure your enemies are standing right on top of them. The leaked files hit the internet, and the news cycle erupts. Federal agents are yanked away from Damien to answer for shielding a crime boss. Absolute chaos. In that blind spot, Lucien's next phase begins. 12 of his men stumble into the hospital faking severe injuries, creating a total madhouse. Under the cover of panic, his shooters easily bypass security. On the 4th floor, 2 stubborn feds remain planted outside Damien's door. Then, in walks Lucien. Draped in stolen scrubs with a fake medical chart, he calmly states he needs to check the patient's vitals. The agents step aside, completely unaware the Grim Reaper just walked past them. It leaves us with a chilling life lesson. The loudest distraction in the room will always be used to hide the deadliest knife. Stick with me here, because this is where the tension peaks. Lucien slips past the agents, a shadow wearing a borrowed badge. He pulls a weapon from beneath his chart, aiming it at Damien. Damien reaches for the call button, but Lucien promises to drop the guards too. Cornered, Damien mocks him. He dares him to shoot, swearing Lucien will never escape alive. Lucien is pure ice. He does not care, as long as his enemy dies first. His finger tightens, just 1 ounce of pressure to end this vendetta. But in that agonizing second, the innocent voice of his little girl echoes in his mind. Are you leaving me again? It reveals a quiet, profound truth. Giving into blind rage is an easy fix, but true strength is stepping back from the ledge to protect the people who actually need you. The air in that room is suffocating. Lucien stands still, weapon drawn, aching under the weight of his violent history. Just as you brace for the fatal shot, he lowers the gun. Damien laughs, calling him weak. But Lucien is done playing by the rules of the underworld. He raises his phone, and the game ends. Every news station is broadcasting Damien's darkest secrets. His federal protection is shattered, his syndicate turning to dust. The cruelest irony? Damien's own brother sang to the police to save himself. Lucien delivers a crushing final blow. Damien is heading to a brutal prison, where every rival he crossed will be waiting. It leaves us with a vital life lesson. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply stepping back and letting a toxic person drown in their own poison. Horror washes over Damien as the reality sets in. He stammers, realizing he is now just a walking target. Lucien coldly replies he is simply collecting the toll. The brilliant tragedy is that Lucien does not need to pull the trigger. He only has to ensure this fallen boss spends his life looking over his shoulder, waiting for a shadow to move. Lucien flashes a hollow smile, admitting Damien almost won, but Lucien learned a profound life lesson we should all carry. The hardest choice in this broken world is actively choosing to build a life, rather than giving in to the urge to destroy one. He casually strolls past the confused federal agents while Damien screams helplessly at his back. Meeting his crew in the dim parking garage, Lucien softly whispers that it is finally done. Marcus studies his boss in the garage, noting Damien is still breathing upstairs. Lucien whispers, the man will soon wish he was not. They speed away as police choppers swarm the hospital, trapping a crime lord who just learned a harsh life lesson. Calculated mercy is often far more brutal than a bullet. Back at the mansion, Serafina finds Lucien staring at the ocean at dawn. She asks why he spared his worst enemy. Lucien confesses that Vivian asked if he was leaving her again, and that innocent question shattered his armor. He spent his life drowning in violence, and it is time to break that cycle. Serafina leans against the balcony, asking where they can possibly go now. Lucien watches the morning light and answers. They need to find somewhere perfectly normal. Serafina doubts a normal life is possible for people stained by the underworld. Lucien says there is only one way to find out. As dawn breaks, Vivian wanders out, rubbing her eyes, asking if they are leaving. We can surely relate to this desperate hope. Lucien looks at this child who has seen too much darkness, promising they are heading somewhere safe. When Vivian asks about pancakes, Serafina laughs through her tears, promising a mountain of them. They stand together, holding fragile hope. But the clock is ticking. Marcus delivers a grim update. They have exactly 72 hours before federal agents bring the hammer down. 72 hours to vanish without a trace. It reveals a simple truth. Hope is a beautiful feeling, but swift action is what actually keeps you alive. Over 12 hours, Lucien systematically tears down his crime family. He filters millions through shell companies, hands his territory to loyal men, and dumps crates of artillery into the harbor. The ghost monarch is erasing his own legend. Trucks roar outside, hauling away his violent past. Inside, Vivian quietly draws a picture of a normal house. No high concrete walls, zero bulletproof glass. She murmurs she wants to live somewhere warm with no basements, because basements are just for hiding. It reveals a striking truth. Holding on to toxic baggage only keeps you locked in the shadows. Sometimes you must completely burn down the life you built just to feel the sun on your face again. Serafina pulls the little girl into a tight hug, promising the hiding is officially over. Vivian looks up, asking a heartbreaking question. Will her dad be less scary when they leave? Serafina wants to say yes but refuses to lie. She explains her father will always have sharp edges, but in a new home, he might never need them. This reality carries a deep life lesson. You cannot erase a brutal past, but changing your environment gives your soul room to breathe. The doors suddenly fly open. Lucien walks in, looking like he has not slept in a decade. Dismantling his crime syndicate has drained him entirely. Just as they prepare to run, a wild complication arrives. Catherine Wells, the ruthless attorney who started this nightmare, demands an urgent meeting. She claims to hold crucial intelligence they need before they vanish. This is definitely about to get messy. Suspecting a trap, Lucien meets Catherine at a busy cafe. She drops her courtroom armor, wearing plain clothes and looking fragile. Lucien slides into the booth while his men secure the perimeter. Catherine skips the small talk, sliding a thick envelope across the table. This envelope is pure dynamite. It holds every dark secret Damien Voss ever buried: the fraud, the kidnappings, the bloody money trails. It is everything needed to completely ruin him. Lucien narrows his eyes, demanding her true motive. She exhales a shaky breath, admitting that stealing a little girl crossed a moral line she could not stomach. It leaves us with a vital lesson. Even the most ruthless players have a breaking point. Push people to commit pure evil, and they just might hand your head to your worst enemy. Lucien coldly reminds the lawyer she could have just walked away. Catherine grips her coffee, drowning in guilt. She insists this folder is the ultimate weapon, proving Damien S. men committed brutal perjury. She urges Lucien to trade his crime syndicate to the feds for ironclad immunity. Lucien studies her face, searching for a trap, but only finds crushing regret. When asked what she expects in return, she softly tells him to consider it penance for tearing a little girl from her father. Then she walks away into the crowd. This reveals a hard truth we all must learn. Owning your mistakes is merely step one. Doing the dangerous work to actually fix the damage is what truly counts. She cannot undo the past, but she just handed Lucian the keys to his family's freedom. Lucian sits in silence, staring down two agonizing paths. He can grab his family and flee like hunted ghosts, or use this file to wipe Damien's empire off the map. Let us look at this together, you and I. His choice becomes undeniable. The scene shifts to the prosecutor's office. Lucian strolls in, wearing a tailored suit, instead of tactical gear, completely unarmed. He sits across from the chief attorney, like they are old friends. She coldly states they never negotiate with fugitives. But Lucian teaches us a masterful lesson right here. When you know exactly how much power you hold, you never beg for a seat at the table. You walk straight into the lion's den and demand one. He is done hiding in the shadows, ready to drop the biggest trump card of his life. Lucian looks the prosecutor dead in the eye. He tells her they will negotiate today, because he is handing her the biggest mob takedown in history. He slides the heavy envelope across the desk. It holds the keys to the underworld racketeering charges, money trails, and enough evidence to bury Damien forever. The attorney scans the pages, shock widening her eyes. She calls it an absolute gift. Lucian does not blink. He demands full immunity for his family and his crew. He wants sealed records and a spotless slate. She leans back, calculating her career boost. The lesson here is profound. Unshakable confidence is your greatest weapon in any room. Know your worth and never flinch. Finally, she asks the golden question. Why flip now after 20 years of ruling the dark? The attorney asks why he waited so long. Lucian lets his armor drop. His daughter deserves better than speaking to him through prison glass. The underworld costs too much now. But the prosecutor demands a steep price. She needs him the witness stand against every boss in that file. Lucian closes his eyes. He pictures Vivian sketching a safe home, and Serafina holding a weapon to survive his mistakes. In that quiet room, he finally kills the mob king within himself and agrees to testify. They shake hands, and the crushing weight of a criminal empire slides off his shoulders. The life lesson here is profound. Real strength is never about hoarding power. It is knowing exactly when to let it go for the people you love. The deal is signed. The nightmare is over. You and I are going to unpack a heavy story today. Lucian always ensured his promises were etched in stone. He makes a final call to Marcus, confirming his crew secured full immunity. Damien is now strictly the government's problem. Marcus offers a grim warning, reminding him the underworld will hunt him for breaking their blood code. Lucian embraces the threat, preferring to be a nameless target than a king in hell. On a bitter Tuesday morning, they abandon Boston forever. There are no armored convoys, just a broken man, a weary nurse, and a child fleeing the dark. Vivian watches the city vanish in the rearview mirror, tracing the cold glass. The lesson here is profound. Sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is simply walking away from the empire that demands your soul. From the back seat, Vivian asks if they will ever return. Lucian meets her eyes in the mirror, asking if she wants to. The child shakes her head, murmuring that the city holds too many ghosts. Serafina smiles, joking that her heavy reading habits are rubbing off on the girl. As they push south, winter snow melts into streams. Gripping the wheel at dawn, Lucian realizes a terrifying truth. He cannot recall the last time he drove without scanning the road for assassins. It is a fragile, beautiful freedom. They settle in a nameless coastal town, renting a humble place near the waves that mirrors the safe houses Vivian used to sketch. This teaches us a profound life lesson. Peace is not a destination you find on a map, but a quiet sanctuary you build from the ashes of your own trauma. The new house breathes with the scent of salt water instead of gunpowder. Windows slide open easily, free of heavy security locks. This sheer normalcy is suffocating for a man used to endless war. While Serafina unpacks, Lucian builds a wooden bookshelf with the exact same precision he once used to dismantle rival families. He confesses, his voice a low rumble, that this ordinary life feels like a lie, wondering if they are just pretending the bloodshed never happened. Serafina pauses with immense clarity. She says they are not erasing the dark past, but simply refusing to let it dictate their tomorrow. He thanks her softly for staying. We must learn a vital life lesson here. Acknowledging our deepest scars is the only true way to keep them from writing the rest of our story. He expresses his gratitude, amazed she stayed when anyone else would have bolted. He fears his violent world cost her everything. Serafina shakes her head, her voice steady. She insists it did not cost her everything, only who she used to be. Truthfully, she despised that hollow version of herself. That exhausted nurse was so consumed with saving strangers, she forgot how to rescue her own soul. She tells him that he and Vivian taught her the true meaning of survival, letting people in. Vivian dashes into the room. exclaiming that the house sounds like it breathes with the ocean. Hearing the child's fearless laughter washes over them like summer rain. The life lesson is profound. Shedding our old identity is the painful, necessary price we pay to finally discover where we belong. Staring into the quiet kitchen, Lucian mutters a dark confession. He is terrified they will ruin this peace. He has no blueprint for being a father, only a monster. Serafina smiles, reminding him they are both broken. But they will walk through the wreckage together. That first month is a suffocating struggle. The phantom weight of the underworld clings to him. He obsessively checks deadbolts and views harmless tourists as assassins. Paranoia runs deep. At 3 a.m, Serafina finds him gripped by dread, a gun in his hand as he watches the empty street. She gently pries the cold steel from his fingers. You and I both know this life lesson. Letting go of the armor that once kept you alive is terrifying. But it is the only true way to let your battered soul heal. The transition to peace is agonizing. They have no blueprint for normal life, but the world demands they adapt. Serafina suffers brutal night terrors, jolting awake in cold sweats to check the news on the syndicate trials. Trauma is a relentless ghost. But the universe has a strange irony. Lucian, an enforcer whose hands were sculpted for violence, finds quiet work baking bread before dawn. He trades cold steel for flour, working the heavy dough as if kneading the rage right out of his muscles. Serafina finds purpose again at a sleepy clinic. Their healing is a grueling, silent crawl. The life lesson here is undeniable. We can never erase our dark past, but we possess the profound power to mold that residual pain into a steady foundation for a beautiful tomorrow. At the clinic, Serafina bandages scraped knees, remembering the calling that first drew her to medicine. She is no longer a tragic hero, just a safe harbor. Vivian enters the first grade, free from the shadow of a criminal empire. She trades underworld anxiety for playground disputes, and soon begins calling them Mama and Papa. Months into their exile, they celebrate her birthday on the sandy shore. Lucian bakes a cake, wrapping small gifts in old newspaper. It is a humble display, carrying more warmth than any gilded mansion could. Vivian closes her eyes, wishing to stay in this golden moment forever. This gives us a profound life lesson. You do not need vast fortunes to build a perfect life. The most precious memories are often the quiet ones, wrapped up in unconditional love. Lucian murmurs that wishes are meant to be spoken aloud, but you and I know this peace was always a ticking clock. 1 year after their escape, the phone rings, shattering the quiet. It is the prosecutor. The kingpin is facing trial, and they demand Lucian take the stand. He grips the receiver, knuckles turning bone white. They offer protection, but his refusal is instant. He pictures Vivian sleeping soundly and Serafina smiling. He refuses to drag them back into the arena, declaring he will face the fire alone, standing in his kitchen. The icy grip of his past tightens around his throat once more. The life lesson is inescapable. You cannot outrun your dark past forever. Eventually, you must turn and look your darkest demons dead in the eye to shield the people you love. Let us pause and look closely at this moment in the kitchen. Serafina finds him paralyzed by the weight of the coming trial. Her mind snaps back to the cold survival calculus of the underworld, warning him that the syndicate will hunt him down before he reaches the witness stand. Fleeing is an option, but Lucian is tired of watching shadows bleed into his life. Then, Vivian peeks around the doorframe. Her wide eyes hold an agonizing terror of abandonment, cutting this former killer deeper than any blade. He kneels, promising he just needs to lock the monsters away. The life lesson here is impossible to ignore. Running from your past only feeds the dark anxiety in your chest. To claim real freedom, you have to walk deliberately into the flames and finish the battle yourself. Vivian's tiny voice trembles as she asks what happens if he never comes back. Lucian swallows his grief, vowing to call every single night. When she leaves, the phantom aches of a violent past settle into his bones. He tells Serafina he has no desire to play the martyr, but she looks at him with sorrowful pride, knowing his soul demands this, the memory of her pulling him from the freezing snow flashes in his mind. Soon, he is breathing the suffocating air of a Boston federal courthouse. For 3 agonizing days, he drills his testimony, walking a razor's edge to avoid his own prison cell. This brings us to a stark life lesson. True redemption is not just wished into existence. It is forged the very second you step up to pay the heavy debts you could have easily walked away from. You and I are going to unpack this next exchange together. The prosecutor warns that the defense will paint him to the jury as an irredeemable villain. Lucian remains a mask of stone, simply agreeing that he is. The prosecutor counters with dark pragmatism, calling him the necessary weapon to slaughter a larger beast. It captures the hollow moral compromises the law makes to keep order. Soon he steps into the firing line of the witness box. Later that night, drowning in the silence of a safe house, he calls home. Vivian's bright voice fills the receiver, rambling about a spelling test. Her innocence anchors him, pulling him back from the absolute edge. It reveals a humbling life lesson. You do not need a spotless soul to do what is right. Sometimes, it takes a monster to dismantle hell. Notice the agonizing contrast of this scene. Vivian chatters on the phone about cookies and a story about a talking pig. It is a flash of pure innocence bleeding into a world of violence. Lucian fights a heavy tremor in his throat, desperate to return. A week feels like an eternity in purgatory. Then Serafina takes the phone, softly asking if he is frightened. He strips away his armor, admitting he's utterly terrified. She echoes his own wisdom back to him, reminding him that fear is what keeps a soldier sharp. The life lesson here is vital. Fear is never a weakness. It is the raw instinct that keeps you breathing when the world goes dark. The call ends. Lucian lies on the stiff bed of the safe house, tormented by the brutal choices that dragged him to this final crossroad. Think about the sheer madness of this scenario. Lucian traded a criminal empire just for a taste of immunity. The life lesson here is profound. The ultimate victory is never about holding power, it is about finally finding peace. He simply wanted his family safe. We jump forward to the courtroom. The room is suffocating, packed with agents and Damien's men glaring daggers. Lucian steps to the stand, takes the oath, and stares down the monster who tried to bury him. Yet, in that orange jumpsuit, Damien just looks pathetic. He is nothing more than a bitter old man. The prosecutor wastes no time. She walks Lucian through their agonizing history, the mob partnership, the brutal betrayal, surviving 16 bullets, and the kidnapping plot that ignited this entire revenge tour. Lucian answers every question smoothly. Yes, Damien ordered the hit. Yes, the kidnapping was blackmail. The defense attorney then steps up, treating him like dirt. She asks if he is just a mobster getting a free pass. He fires back, admitting his terrible choices while insisting he is finally doing what is right. She mocks his noble act and demands to know exactly how many lives he has taken. The judge allows it. Lucian could easily lie here, but there is a vital life lesson in his response. Owning your darkest past is the only way to strip away its power over you. He looks directly at the jury and drops the heaviest truth of the trial. He admits he honestly does not know the number because he lost count after the first 12. It is a moment of absolute bone-chilling honesty. He owns his history, admitting he was a monster, but he wants his daughter to know he fought to become a better man. The courtroom goes dead silent. The lawyer pivots, trying to drag Serafina into the mud by calling her an accomplice. Lucian instantly shuts that down. He calls her a hero nurse raising his child, while he ensures Damien pays the price. For 2 brutal hours, the defense tries to break him, painting him as a liar saving his own skin. But look at the deeper meaning here. The profound life lessons that your darkest skills can sometimes be repurposed for the greater good. Lucian spent 20 years in the Mafia. He knows exactly how to weaponize the raw, unfiltered truth to crush Damien Voss forever. After 2 hours of relentless grilling, this agonizing marathon is over. The judge dismisses him, and Lucian walks past Damien one last time. Damien mutters that this is not over. Lucian cold fires his bank that Damien in Kratzell while he gets to go home. He steps into a federal SUV and vanishes. 3 days later, the verdict drops. Guilty on all charges. Damien gets 45 years with 0 parole. The prosecutor warns Lucian to never return to Boston. He immediately books a flight out. When he lands, little Vivian tackles him so hard his healing ribs ache, screaming that he actually came back. He smiles, realizing keeping a promise is far heavier than just making one. Let us reflect on this timeless life lesson. Actions will always speak louder than empty words, and it turns out that sweet kid learned that golden rule directly from watching Serafina. He looks at Serafina, standing there with happy tears. He softly tells her the nightmare is done. As they drive home, Vivian talks his ear off about school and her pet crab. The real-life lesson here is beautiful, the most ordinary. Boring moments are the only things in life worth bleeding for. We jump ahead 5 years. They are living a quiet dream on the Italian coast. They opened a bakery named Velvet Jasmine, honoring the street where he almost died and the tea she used to heal him. Every morning, this former mafia enforcer wakes up to bake bread. He uses those scarred, dangerous hands to create something beautiful, instead of tearing the world apart. Serafina works at a local clinic, getting paid in homemade wine and sweet stories. They have won the ultimate victory. Picture this heavy contrast. The ghost monarch of Boston, the most terrifying mob boss to walk the streets, is now baking bread under the Italian sun. Talk about a massive shift. His kid, Vivian, is practicing piano for the locals instead of dodging bullets. One afternoon, Serafina asks if he ever misses ruling that violent underground empire. You know what this former kingpin says? He looks at his kid, looks at the woman who flipped his entire universe upside down, and drops a profound truth. He says he found something far stronger than fear. He found a chance to just be a regular man. Here is a life lesson for us to carry. Sometimes the biggest triumph is not ruling a dark empire. It is surviving long enough to sit in the quiet sun and make a simple loaf of bread. Serafina smiles at that, and the church bells ring like a cinematic masterpiece. After all the endless bloodbaths and mafia vendettas they survived, they are finally ready to breathe. That night, they relax on the terrace. Vivian is inside playing classical music and the air smells of fresh pastries. Out of nowhere, the ex-mob boss gets soft. He tries to thank Serafina for pulling his bleeding body from that frozen snowbank years ago. She shakes her head, telling him he saved himself. Then this ruthless enforcer, a man who spent 40 years communicating purely through violence, pulls her close and simply says he loves her. The life lesson here is deeply moving. True strength is having the courage to admit when someone else is the real reason you are still standing. Check out her response to this. She does not even flinch. She simply tells him she already knows because of the careful way he makes her coffee every morning. He treats a cup of dark roast like the Holy Grail. This guy used to orchestrate gang hits, but now his vibe is pure domestic acts of service. Suddenly, Vivian crashes the tender moment, begging to go to the water. The three of them hit the cobblestone streets, walking past old stone walls and stray cats. Watching this kid happily chase the waves leaves a deep mark on the soul. What is the final life lesson here? You can take the hardest people, put them through hell, and they can still turn it around. Sometimes the ultimate revenge against your worst enemies is simply living a totally happy, unbothered life. You and I must pause to appreciate the beautiful irony here. Serafina looks at their quiet new setup and casually mentions they did okay. Okay? They absolutely crushed it. They stand peacefully by the ocean while their kid collects shells, acting like they did not just survive a vicious underworld war. Those brutal beatdowns and near-death experiences led to this exact serene second, where the dark past is wiped completely clean. They are not in the cold streets of Boston running illegal empires anymore. They are thriving in a coastal town where nobody has a clue who they really are. We are looking at a literal mafia don baking fresh bread, and a hardened street nurse doing routine checkups. The profound lesson is wonderfully simple. You never have to stay trapped in the toxic environment that created your pain. You always possess the absolute power to pack your bags, cross the ocean, and rewrite your own story. Look closely at this profound picture. 3 shattered individuals managed to build a family out of the smoking wreckage of their past. Vivian runs back across the sand, holding a perfect shell, keeping it to remember how flawless this quiet day was. She smiles at these 2 traumatized adults, 2 people who fought off real-life monsters just to give her a normal childhood. It proves that family is not always determined by blood. Sometimes, it is the fiercely loyal crew you assemble while fighting for your life in the trenches. As they walk back home together through the fading twilight, the phantom of the Boston underworld is officially dead. They left all that toxic vendetta baggage miles behind them in the ashes. The final life lesson here is incredibly clear. No matter how deep you are currently sinking in the darkness, you can always grind your way out and actually learn to embrace a peaceful, ordinary moment. Look at how beautifully mundane their new reality has become. Lucian wakes before the sun, his scarred hands buried in flour, kneading bread instead of shattering bone. Serafina spends her days healing everyday injuries, while Vivian argues over math at the table. Later that night, Serafina asks the heavy question, does he ever miss the crown, the sheer intoxication of the empire he left behind? Lucian goes perfectly still, remembering the terror he used to command. Then he looks at his sleeping daughter, and the woman who saved him. Zero regrets, he tells her. Here is a truth you and I can both learn from. True strength is not about the fear you can inflict on others. It is knowing exactly when to walk away from a rigged game, trading empty power for the few people who actually hold your world together. Let us sit with one last quiet scene to close out this story. Lucian pulls Serafina close, his hand resting over the 16 scars from the night she pulled him back from death. He whispers a thank you for not letting him bleed out in that freezing snowbank, proving that even brutal monsters can change. She just smiles, telling him he was human the whole time, buried under the violence waiting to be found. They fall asleep to the steady rhythm of the ocean. The Boston mob wars are just ghosts now. The crime lord died in the snow, leaving behind a man who simply wants to protect his home. Listen to me on this. No matter how many heavy scars you carry from your own past battles, the pen is still in your hand. You always have the power to step out of the dark and completely rewrite your own ending.
Lucian Moretti begins the story as a man shaped by violence. He is feared, obeyed, and powerful. But his power has cost him almost everything: peace, trust, safety, and the ability to live like a normal person. His journey shows us that true strength is not only the ability to defeat enemies. True strength is the courage to change. At first, Lucian believes violence is the answer to every problem. He survives lives because he is harder and more dangerous than the people around him. But Serafina and Vivian slowly teach him a different truth. A man can win battles and still lose his soul. A father can protect his child from enemies and still fail to give her a happy life. The most meaningful part of Lucian's transformation is that he eventually walks away from his empire. This is not easy. Power can become addictive. Fear can feel like respect. Control can feel like safety. But Lucian begins to understand that the life he built is also the cage that traps his daughter. His decision to testify, leave Boston, and start over is a powerful educational lesson. People are not prisoners of their past forever. A person who has made mistakes can still choose responsibility. Change does not erase the past, but it can give the future a different direction. In real life, many people stay in harmful patterns because they think it is too late to become someone better. This story says the opposite. Change is painful but possible. Redemption begins when a person stops defending who they were and starts building who they need to become. Lucian's greatest victory is not defeating Damien. His greatest victory is becoming a father Vivian no longer has to fear.